The storm was wild and angry. Heavy rain poured down on the black car as it drove fast on the empty road. The headlights were weak against the thick rain. Inside the car, Keanu Reeves held the steering wheel tight, his face serious. He was running out of time. He had a super important business meeting waiting for him, a deal worth $1 billion. This meeting could change his life forever. But then, bang. A loud noise. The car shook hard and swerved to the side. The tires slid on the wet road before coming to a shaky stop. Keanu's hands tightened on the wheel. No phone signal. No other cars. No one to help. For the first time in a long time, Keanu was completely stuck. Before we continue the story, tell us, where are you reading from? Write your location in the comments. Rain pounded on the windshield, making a loud tapping sound. Keanu squeezed the wheel, his fingers turning white. He stared at the wet, curvy road ahead. His car's headlights barely lit up the way. The wipers moved back and forth fast, but the rain was too heavy. He glanced at the glowing numbers on the dashboard. Only 45 minutes left until his big meeting in the city. He sighed. Keanu had worked for years to build his name. He had given everything, his time, his energy, to be successful. This deal, this meeting was supposed to be another big step forward. But it looked like life had other plans. Bang. A huge noise. The car shook again. It pulled to the right. Keanu gripped the wheel tightly, trying to control it. But within seconds, the car slid to the side of the road. He quickly hit the brakes. The tires skidded on the wet ground before the car finally stopped. Keanu's heart was pounding. He unbuckled his seatbelt, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The rain was freezing. It soaked through his fancy suit in seconds. He ran a hand through his wet hair and sighed. He walked to the back of the car and groaned. The rear tire was completely destroyed. The rubber was ripped apart, hanging off the wheel like torn paper. The metal rim was almost damaged too. Keanu looked around. The road stretched far in both directions, dark, empty, and lonely. No houses. No other cars. Just the wind blowing loudly through the fields. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Great, he muttered. This wasn't a problem he could fix by calling someone for help. He was alone, soaking wet and quickly losing time. Fixing a tire? Not something he knew how to do. He spent his life making movies, not fixing cars. He leaned against the car, closing his eyes, trying to think. Maybe he could walk to find help. But where? There was nothing but wet, muddy fields for miles. Then, through the sound of the storm, something strange happened. Laughter. Keanu frowned and squinted into the rain. Was it just the wind? Was his mind playing tricks on him? No. He heard it again, voices laughing, happy. Then, in the distance, he saw them. 3 kids on bicycles. Their dark shapes moved through the heavy rain like shadows. They weren't rushing. They weren't scared of the storm. They were just riding, laughing, enjoying the moment. As they got closer, Keanu saw their faces under a streetlight. 3 black boys, maybe 15 years old. Their clothes were muddy, their sneakers soaked, but they didn't seem to care. One of them, the tallest, wore a blue raincoat with the hood down. He was the first to see Keanu. "Hey, mister. You need help?" he called, stopping his bike. Keanu stood up straight, surprised. "Help? Out here? In the middle of nowhere?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah," he admitted. "Yeah, I really do." The 3 boys got off their bikes and walked toward the car. Rain dripped from their jackets, but they didn't seem to mind. The tall boy with the blue raincoat brushed wet curls from his face. "You got a spare tire, right?" he asked, crouching down to check the damage. Yeah. In the trunk," Keanu said. He still couldn't believe this was happening. The boy nodded and turned to his friends. "All right. Lucas, grab the jack. Owen, keep the car steady." Keanu watched in amazement. They moved quickly like they had done this before. Lucas, a short boy with a big gap-toothed grin, ran to the trunk. He pulled out the jack and the wrench like a pro. Owen, the quiet one, pressed his hands against the car to keep it steady. The leader, whose name Keanu later learned was Damien, started loosening the bolts on the wheel. Keanu watched in shock. "You've done this before?" he asked. Damien grinned. "A few times. Mostly on bikes. But hey, a tire's a tire." Keanu chuckled. Here he was, a man who had spent years in action movies, doing crazy stunts. But when it comes to a flat tire, he was completely useless. Meanwhile, these kids were handling it like experts. The storm raged on. Wind blew against their wet clothes. But the boys didn't stop. They worked quickly, focused, and confident. Keanu shook his head. "You don't mind getting soaked?" he asked. Owen just shrugged. "It's just rain." Keanu smirked. When was the last time he met people of this kind? This unbothered? In less than 20 minutes, the boys had changed the tire. Damien wiped his hands on his wet jeans and stood up. "All done," he announced. Keanu looked at the new tire, then back at the kids. In less than half an hour, they had turned what felt like a disaster into nothing. "You guys are amazing," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some money. "Here, take this. You earned it." Damien held up his hands and shook his head. "Nah, we're good." Keanu frowned. "Are you sure?" "It's the least I can do." Lucas grinned. "You needed help, so we helped. That's it." Keanu didn't know what to say. He was used to a world where favors came with a price, where kindness wasn't free. But these kids, they reminded him that real kindness still existed. As they hopped back on their bikes, Damien called out, "Drive safe, mister." Keanu watched them disappear into the storm, their laughter fading into the distance. For years, he had lived in a world where everything was about deals, money, and expectations. But tonight, 3 kids had reminded him of something simple: helping just because you can. As he sat back in his car and gripped the steering wheel, he realized this wasn't just kindness. It was a lesson. Keanu sat in his car looking at the clock on the dashboard. The rain was still tapping on the windshield. He had time, just barely, but something made him stop. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but his thoughts were not on his meeting. He kept thinking about the 3 boys riding their bikes in the rain, laughing as they pedaled away. They had helped him without asking for anything in return. That was strange to him. In his world, people only helped when they wanted something back: money, favors, or connections. But those kids didn't even hesitate. They had acted like helping was the most normal thing to do. With a deep breath, Keanu started the car and drove toward the city. His body was heading to his meeting, but his mind was stuck on that moment. He kept replaying how the boys worked together so easily, treating the whole thing like it was just another part of their day. It had been a long time since he had seen kindness like that, kindness that wasn't planned or fake. By the time he reached the tall glass building in the middle of the city, the rain had slowed down. A man with an umbrella rushed to his car as he stepped out. He looked down at his fancy suit, now stained with mud. He didn't care. Inside, the conference room was filled with important people in expensive suits. They whispered to each other, their shiny watches catching the bright lights. When Keanu walked in, his team sat up straighter, looking relieved. He was someone who could take charge of a room just by walking in. He had spent years learning how to do that. But today, as he opened the papers in front of him, he found it hard to focus. The numbers on the page didn't seem important. Instead, he saw Damien's confident smile as he loosened the tire bolts. He saw Owen holding the car steady, staying calm. He saw Lucas shrugging like it was no big deal when he refused the money. "You needed help, so we helped." Simple. The meeting went on. Keanu nodded at the right times, answered questions, and signed papers. The deal was closed. Another billion-dollar success. His team clapped him on the back, celebrating another victory. But Keanu felt nothing. Later, he sat in his office, staring out at the city lights. Something felt different. Those boys had only changed his tires. That was all. But somehow they had done something bigger. Something he couldn't quite explain. They had reminded him of something important. Something he didn't even realize he had lost. Keanu leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. He had to go back. Keanu sat in his tall office building, looking down at the city below. The billion-dollar deal was done. The other business people had left, and his team had congratulated him. But as he watched the last raindrops disappear, he felt empty. He should have been happy. He had just made another big step in his career. But his mind wasn't on the deal. It was on those boys, Damien, Lucas, and Owen. 3 kids on bikes, soaked in the rain, laughing like it didn't matter. They had worked together perfectly to help a stranger. They hadn't asked who he was. They hadn't cared. And then they had simply ridden away as if they hadn't just changed the way he saw the world. Keanu ran a hand through his damp hair. He could still hear their voices, still see their muddy hands fixing his tire. He still remembered how they had said no to his money. Who does that? A knock on the door pulled him back. His assistant peeked in. "Mr. Reeves, the press wants a statement about the deal." Keanu looked at the papers on his desk. This deal had taken months to put together. It should have been the most important thing in his mind. But right now it wasn't. Instead, he found himself wondering, what's the point? He shook his head. "Tell them I'll send something later." His assistant hesitated but then nodded. "Of course." As the door closed, Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. For years he had chased success. He had believed that every big win would bring him closer to something. But what? Respect? Legacy? Purpose? Now he wasn't sure anymore. He didn't know when he had started feeling so far away from real life. Maybe it had happened after years of living in hotels, sitting in meetings, and hearing people talk about him like he was just a name, a powerful businessman, not a real person. But those kids, they didn't care about any of that. They had helped him because they wanted to. They hadn't asked for anything. They hadn't need a reason. Keanu stood up. He didn't even fully understand what he was doing. He just knew one thing: he had to go back. Not because he owed them. Not because he wanted to pay them back. But because, for the first time in a long time, something actually mattered. The highway stretched in front of him, a long road cutting through fields and small neighborhoods. Keanu gripped the steering wheel, driving fast, his thoughts racing even faster. He had no plan, no idea what he would say. He only knew one thing. He couldn't let this moment pass. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. The ground was still wet and the sky was clear. As he got closer to the small town, the tall buildings of the city felt far away. Here life moved slower. People weren't rushing to meetings, chasing deadlines, or worrying about deals. And somewhere in this town, 3 boys were living their lives. 3 boys who had reminded him what it meant to be human. Keanu saw the diner first. It was a small, simple building with an old sign. The windows were foggy from the warm air inside. Outside the diner, 3 boys, Damien, Lucas, and Owen, stood by their bikes, laughing. They had been on a big adventure in the rain last night, and now it was just another fun story to tell. Keanu stopped his car and got out. Everyone nearby turned to look. A fancy black car in a small town like this was already surprising, but when Keanu Reeves stepped out, it was even more shocking. Damien was the first to notice. His eyes got big for a second, but then he smiled. "Hey, it's the guy with the flat tire." Lucas leaned against his bike, grinning. "Did you get another one?" Keanu laughed and shook his head. "Nope, my tires are fine." He paused, then said, "I just wanted to see you guys again." The boys looked at each other, a little confused but curious. Owen crossed his arms. "Why?" Keanu sighed and took a step closer. "Because what you did yesterday, that wasn't normal." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Changing a tire? Pretty normal." Keanu shook his head. "Not the way you did it. You helped me without thinking, without asking for anything in return. Just pure kindness. I don't see that a lot anymore." The boys shifted, not sure what to say. They hadn't thought much about it. Keanu continued, "I wanted to do something to say thank you, but I wanted to ask you first." Damien leaned forward on his bike. "Like what?" Keanu glanced at their bikes. The chains were rusty, the tires worn out. He thought about buying them new bikes, but that didn't feel like the right idea. Then he remembered what really mattered to them. "The community center," Keanu said. "Tell me about it." The boys' faces lit up. Damien spoke first, excited. "It's a place where kids go after school, but it's falling apart. The roof leaks, the equipment is old, and they've been trying to fix it, but they don't have enough money." Keanu nodded. A plan was already forming in his head. "All right," he said. "Let's fix it." The boys stared at him in shock. Lucas was the first to speak. "Wait, are you serious?" Keanu smiled. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Inside the diner, Keanu sat at a booth with Damien, Lucas, and Owen. The air smelled like pancakes and coffee. The boys were still in shock, looking at each other with excitement. "You're really going to help fix the community center?" Damien asked, his voice full of hope. Keanu nodded. "Yeah, but not just small repairs. I want to do this right, fix the roof, get new equipment, maybe even make new spaces for kids to hang out." Lucas whistled. "That sounds huge." "It is," Keanu said, "but you guys deserve it." Owen, the quiet one, studied Keanu carefully. "What?" Keanu leaned back in his seat, tapping his fingers on the table. "Because people like you remind me of what's important," he said. "I've been around a lot of people who only help when they get something in return. But you guys? You didn't even think twice. That kind of kindness, it should be passed on." The boys looked at each other, still trying to understand what was happening. Then Damien grinned. "Man, last night we were just changing a tire. Now we're getting a whole new community center." Keanu laughed. Life works in funny ways. For the next hour, the boys told him everything about the center. It was like a second home for many kids in town, a safe place to go after school instead of getting into trouble. But the broken furniture, old equipment, and leaks made it hard to enjoy. Keanu listened carefully. When the conversation slowed, he leaned forward. "All right, here's what's going to happen. I'll call some people and get the job done. But this isn't just about me spending money. If we're doing this, I want you 3 involved." Lucas blinked. "Like, helping with construction?" Keanu smirked. Maybe not lifting heavy stuff, but I want you to be part of the decisions. Help pick what the center needs. Make sure it's a place you're proud of. Damien grinned. Deal? Keanu stood up and tossed some money on the table for their food. All right. I've got work to do. The boys jumped up, energy buzzing around them. As Keanu stepped outside, he looked back. Are you guys up for a challenge? Owen smirked. Always. Good, Keanu said, putting on his sunglasses. Because we're about to do something amazing. As he walked to his car, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Real purpose. This wasn't about fame or money. This was about doing something that truly mattered. The town was filled with excitement. The old, broken-down community center now stood strong and beautiful. The walls were freshly painted, the roof was new, and the playground was bright with new swings and slides. Keanu stood near the entrance, watching as families and kids ran toward the new play area. Their laughter filled the air. It was a happy, hopeful sound. You sure know how to make an entrance, Damien said, waking up beside him. Keanu smirked. Well, I had some pretty great teammates on this one. Lucas and Owen joined them, eyes wide as they looked around. This doesn't even feel real, Lucas said. Last month, this place was falling apart. Keanu crossed his arms, a warm feeling in his chest. You guys made this happen. It was your idea, your town, your community. I just made a few phone calls. Damien laughed. Yeah, a few calls that turned this place into a dream. The ribbon-cutting ceremony began. Linda, the center's director, stood in front of the crowd with a microphone. Her voice was filled with emotion. I don't think words can explain what this means to us, she said, looking at the smiling kids. 4 years we tried to keep this place running, but it was falling apart. We thought we would lose it. And then, out of nowhere, a man walked in and asked how he could help. And he didn't just help, he changed everything. The crowd cheered loudly, their applause echoing through the streets. And in that moment, Keanu knew this was the best thing he had ever done. Keanu was surprised but gave a small wave. Inside, he knew the real heroes were the 3 boys standing next to him. After the big event, families walked inside the new community center. They saw the bright and fun activity rooms, the fixed basketball court, and the library full of new books. Kids ran to the playground, laughing and playing. Their happiness filled the air. Lucas smiled at Keanu. So, what's next? Are you gonna fix the whole town? Keanu laughed. One step at a time. Damien crossed his arms and looked at Keanu. You didn't have to do all this, you know? Keanu nodded. I know. Owen smirked. Then why did you? Keanu looked around. He saw the happy faces of people whose lives had changed. Then he looked at the 3 boys, their kindness, their goodness, their strong belief in doing the right thing. Because you reminded me why it matters, he said simply. For the first time in years, Keanu felt truly happy. As the sun went down, covering the small town in golden light, Keanu stood near his car. He watched the last few families enjoying the new center. Kids were still playing, laughing loudly because they didn't want to leave. Their joy was like magic. Parents stood together, smiling, knowing their town finally had something to be proud of. Damien, Lucas, and Owen walked up to Keanu, still full of energy. You really did it, Damien said, shaking his head, amazed. Keanu chuckled. No, we did it. Lucas smirked. You're not bad for a big Hollywood guy, you know? Keanu laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. They all stood together in silence, watching the last bit of sunlight fade. Then Owen, who usually didn't say much, spoke up. So what now? He asked. Keanu took a deep breath, looking at the center one last time. I don't know, he admitted. But I think I want to do more of this. The boys exchanged looks and nodded. Damien grinned. Well, if you ever need help again, you know where to find us. Keanu smiled. Something inside him felt calm in a way it hadn't in a long time. Yeah, he said. I think I do. The boys reached out their hands one by one. Keanu shook each of them, their grip strong, full of understanding. As they turned to leave, Lucas suddenly stopped. Wait, so, are you just gonna drive off all cool like in the movies? Keanu smirked. Maybe. Owen grinned. At least do the sunglasses move. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulled out his sunglasses slowly and slipped them on. Damien laughed. Whoa, that was smooth. Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. He climbed into his car and rolled down the window. Take care of this place, all right? Always, Damien promised. Keanu started the car and drove down the quiet road. The soft hum of the engine mixed with the night air. But this time something felt different. He didn't feel that empty space inside him. The billion-dollar deals, the business meetings, those things were just paperwork, just another job. But this? Seeing those kids' happy faces, hearing their laughter, feeling the warmth of a town coming back to life. This was real. This was something that would last. For the first time in a long time, Keanu Reeves wasn't thinking about his next movie, his next meeting, or his next big job. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. One small act of kindness, 3 boys helping a stranger, became something much bigger. Keanu Reeves didn't just get his car fixed. He found something he didn't even know he was missing: the power of human kindness. In a world where people care so much about money and success, it's moments like this that truly matter. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.